I mean, there's all sorts of different concepts when you think of immortality. Obviously, most people think we're not dying, but you wouldn't want to be alive if your body couldn't move or do anything, would you? So there's got to be a sense where immortality is about health, and health means a healthy body able to do everything you need to do. So when I think of immortality, I think about the reality of me being able to do everything I need to do, no matter how old I am. Well, it doesn't really matter particularly what you look like, it's actually what you're able to do. So I sort of frame things in my thinking is a state of being in health. Because if you're in health, you're not going to die. If you keep focusing on not dying, then you're thinking of a negative thing rather than a positive thing. So I tend to think of the positive. You know, I'm in a state of health and well-being, which enables me to do everything I need to do in any way. You know, and I think that's the sort of state of being that we can come into. You know, and everything starts with doing something, and then you come into the state of becoming, and then into the state of being. So I learned to enter rest. So I was doing something to enter rest, and then now I'm in a state of rest. So I'm not doing anything anymore. It's who I am. And so much of this journey takes us from doing, becoming, to a state of being. And then that is who you are. Then you don't have to do anything for it. You are it. You know, and that goes for being in a governmental position in heaven, engaging all sorts of different governmental things. It's no longer something I do, it's who I am. I am a son who has governmental authority that I am exercising because of who I am. You know, so it changes, and we all start with the doing, because you sort of do something to get somewhere, but when you're there, you're there. So if you were to say, well, I'm going to travel home, well, you have to do something to travel home, but then you're home. And it's almost like that is what our life should be. We should be living in a state of being which encapsulates everything. Therefore, we're not doing this, doing that, doing the other to try and create something. It's just, this is who we are. And so it's a state of enlightenment, a state of being that we enter through a process to become. And I've looked at lots of different things recently where I can look back at my journey, and I started off in doing and ended up in being. Communion would have been a classic one. You know, I would take communion every day, do the declarations, engage in the life of God, be transformed, get my mind renewed, do all the things that the declarations were about. And then the Father nudged me one day to sort of say, well, there's more to it than this, really. I think he was trying to get me to pursue, well, where's this going? And eventually it was like, well, maybe every time I eat, I can see it as life transforming, engaging the life of God, rather than, well, I'm doing this religious thing. So then I became conscious every time I eat and ate to just focus on, I'm receiving life. And I did that for quite a while. And eventually I got another little bit of a nudge from the Father, who then took me into, well, what about life? You eat, but what else do you do for life? And I was thinking about it, and it's like, oh, I breathe. So I'm actually without breath. I could eat as much food as I like, but if I didn't have any oxygen, my brain would starve and I would die. So I was like, okay, I'm receiving life every time I breathe. And of course, breatharians and Kirby, the guy from Sri Lanka or whatever, I mean, they believe in that, you know, getting life from breath rather than from food. So that's what I then started to focus on. And I became consciously aware of breathing, you know, breathing exercises to get my focused breathing on, this is receiving the life of God. And eventually it was like, okay, I am now living in a state of communion. I'm not taking communion, which can become a religious exercise no matter where you start off, because we have a tendency for things to become routine and ruts, so and then the declarations just become things you say. You're not really engaging in them. So eventually you move to a state of being. I am in communion, continually in communion, and that means I'm constantly receiving the life of God. I am in the presence of God. I am in fellowship, communion with him. Therefore, the light of his presence is always around me and in me. And then so you expand what communion really means, to go beyond something you do to a state of complete being where I am in him and he's in me, which is really what communion is all about. So I have life in me and I'm in life. I'm in light and light is in me. I'm in the spirit and spirit is in me. I'm in love and love is in me. So everything that God is, I'm in, and everything that God is in me. So that means I am in eternity and eternity is in me. So wherever he is, I can be, in a sense. So I learned to live non-linearly from that perspective of communion, being in that state. And I thought of probably 7 or 8 different things that I started off doing. Now I'm being, I just am. So I thought that would be a good session to do at the end of the Engaging God program, just to tie it together and say, look, all the things that you're doing in this, all the things that you may be doing, make sure you don't get stuck in doing and not be. So you get into that state of enlightenment and whole communion and fellowship and relationship, which is a state of being. And it's okay to do to get there. But when you're there, you don't really have to do anymore. You just are. And things begin to manifest because you are.